Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian. I'm the executive pastor here at Epicenter. Pastor Mark is spending time with family this morning, and that means that I get to bring the word to you today, something I'm excited about. First service sat down on me real quick, so stay up with me for just a minute. We're gonna get to the word here in just a second. We're actually going to continue. This is going to be week 5 of our series, Pause. All right, Pastor Mark's been doing a great job. He's been bringing some great words through this series, Pause, about kind of what to do or how to respond when we're in a situation of where life feels like it's been on pause, right? And he's got some really great creative titles. The first one was The Power of the Pause. The second one was The Power of the Pause. There's power in the pause when we praise. I think the next one was the power of the process in the pause, and then there's the power of the right people in the pause. That was last week. So he's got some really great creative titles. My title today is just wait for it. So it's just different stuff. It's not even on the screen. So it's cool though. All right, it's gonna make sense. All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to turn with me to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. And we're going to read from the New American Standard Bible. Most of you probably don't have that Bible. And I'll explain why we're reading from this specific version in just a moment. All right. But it starts like this. It says, "Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary." Speaking of becoming weary, I know y'all been standing up for a long time, so you can have a seat this morning. And the key word in this verse, when I read it this past week in preparation for this message, that key word that jumps out to me is wait, right? Those who wait for the Lord. Originally, I was going to ask y'all at this point to do by show of hands how many of y'all like waiting, but I'm not going to because I already know the answer. The answer is nobody. Right? Nobody likes waiting, but we have to wait all the time. We have to wait in lines. We have to wait for work to be over at 5 o'clock or whenever your shift is done. We have to wait for our paycheck. We have to wait for them to text us back. We have to wait in traffic. We have to wait for the weekend. We have to wait for our birthday. We have to wait for our food to get here. We have to wait, right? And sometimes all that waiting is difficult for us because we're used to having everything at our fingertips. We got the smartphones and super fast internet connections and all that stuff. And so waiting can feel almost painful because we want to do the next thing. We want to watch the next reel or see the next episode or get to the next relationship or the next whatever, and we don't have time to wait around. Man, some of us are tired of waiting for the next thing while we're still doing the previous thing. And I am not here to judge, because I hate waiting. And I'm glad my son's not here because he's like, you shouldn't say wait in church. That's a bad, or you shouldn't say hate in church. That's a bad word. And it's not a bad word, but it's also a word that as a person with diagnosed ADHD, I cannot think of a different word to describe accurately how I feel about waiting. I hate waiting. It makes me physically uncomfortable. Okay? So like, for example, if I'm driving in a car and I'm just like, I got to be somewhere, but I'm running early, which actually never happens, but let's pretend like it did. And so there's no immediate time. Like I don't have to be anywhere at a certain time. I'm just kind of driving. If the light stays red for more than 5 seconds, I start getting angry. And I don't want to be angry. I'm in a good mood, but just there's this restlessness within me. Like, no, I don't need to go, but I want to be able to go if I want to. Right? And then I'll go to the store, Walmart, try to buy a few things, and the line's really long. And that's cool, man, because I'm cool with waiting my turn, but then you're standing in line and the line's not moving. Or you're like looking at the line, like, I should have picked that line. And then always happens, I'm going to this shorter line, and then there's some problem with their credit card, and the line you were in starts going. When I'm in a line like that and the line's not moving, I feel almost physical pain in my body, like I want to throw my stuff down and run out of the store. Like that's how much I don't like waiting. If I go to a doctor's appointment and the appointment's at 9 o'clock and it's 9:01 and they ain't called me back yet, I'm like, y'all better get it together. But, I think I passed it on to my son too, my 5-year-old. He can't, if he has to wait for more than 2 breaths, he starts like crying. He's like, Waiting is too hard. Dada, it's too hard to wait. I'm like, okay, son, well, we literally pulled out of the driveway a minute ago. Stop asking me if we're almost there. He's like, it's too hard. But the thing is, he's right, because waiting is hard, right? It can be, at least. The hardest thing about waiting for me is not knowing, right? I can handle waiting for something that's coming up. I mean, it could be this thing that I'm so excited about doing. So I want to happen more than anything. And if you tell me, hey, this is going to happen on October 14th, 2026, cool. I'm good. I can wait that long because it's quantifiable for me, right? I can just count down the days and I know I'm getting closer because the end is in sight from the very beginning. But please don't ever ask me to attend a meeting or an event without an agenda, because then I can't be like, oh, yep, we did that. We're getting closer to the end. I can't stand it, man. Anytime I go to a movie, as soon as I sit down in those seats, the very first thing I do is check the runtime of that movie so that I know when I'm going to be out of that theater. Not that I want to get away from where I'm at. It's just I need to have that comfort of knowing, hey, this is when it's going to be over. Pro tip, it also helps you better predict how the movie's going to end because you know how much time is left. But anyways, waiting for something when you know that it's coming can be hard enough, but waiting in anticipation without a due date can feel impossible. Even harder than that is waiting for something that you're not sure is ever going to come because you've been waiting so long already. That's what makes the pauses we experience in life so difficult to endure. See, I'm convinced that if God was to show up in any of our lives and say, hey, listen, you're going to experience a challenging season in your life. You're going to have to face some really hard things. And it's going to last 4 months, 17 days, 2 hours, and 26 minutes. I feel like we would say, you know, God, I really don't like that. I wish we could do something else, but if you say that's the way it's got to be, let me just get my calendar. I'll put that end date right. Boom. All right, I'm good, God. Thank you. But if we just say, hey, you're going to face a difficult season, what? When's it going to end? It's going to be a season. Okay, how long is this season going to be? You'll find out. We don't like that, right? Indeterminate periods of waiting challenge us and stretch us in ways that we just don't like, because waiting without knowing reminds us we're not in control. You know, we've established throughout this series that we're all waiting for something. You know, some of us are waiting for answers. Some of us are waiting for healing. Some of us are waiting to find out if we got that job. Some of us are waiting to find out if we still have a job. Some of us are waiting for a loved one we've been praying for to find Jesus. Some of us are waiting for deliverance. Some of us are waiting for provision. Some of us are waiting for the other shoe to drop. Some of us are waiting for something, anything good to happen in our lives so that we can find the strength to keep waiting a little bit longer for that big thing we've been waiting for. But we're all waiting for something. And Isaiah 40 was written to a people who were waiting. The nation of Judah in southern Israel had been overtaken by Babylon. This was the people of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that we had just mentioned. And they had been taken and driven to exile in Alabama. Babylon, that's it. If you've been to Alabama, I haven't been to Alabama, but somebody just said that is exile, so I'll take your word for it. I don't know where that came from. Anyways. All right. They were taken to Babylon. There's some of the same letters in there, I guess. The best and the brightest from Israel were taken to Babylon. And the rest were left abandoned to fend for themselves. Right? In the time of this prophecy, they've been waiting for decades. And there's no evidence that help is on the way. There's no visible reason for optimism. And in the middle of all that waiting and hopelessness, the first 2 verses of Isaiah 40 declare in the NIV, it says this: comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed. One translation says that her days of sadness are over. Her sin has been paid for, and she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her years. And so what you've got is you've got these people who are all dispersed between exile and abandonment. And while they're still waiting for something to happen, God shows up and declares through the prophet, hey, your wait is over. And if you continue to read the entire chapter of Isaiah 40, you're going to see all of these really cool promises that God's made and some declarations about who he is and how strong he is. But the too long didn't read of it all is that the bookends of chapter 40 is, hey, the wait is over. Now keep waiting. Man, but that's sometimes is the tension that we live in as followers of Jesus. Theologians frame this as a principle of already, but not yet. Right? And some examples of that is like, hey, God has already redeemed the world through Jesus, but the world has not yet been fully redeemed. God has already promised provision, but we have not yet seen those promises come to fruition. God has already given us strength, but we do not yet feel strong. You know, some of you are praying for healing. God has already promised healing, but that healing has not yet come. And all of this is what makes Isaiah 40, verse 31, such a beautiful and challenging verse. We'll read it again in the NASB for just a second. It says, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles, and they will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. And the prophet is declaring something like a conditional promise. He's like saying, if you wait, then you will. Right? If you wait for the Lord, then you will gain new strength, even though you don't have it yet. If you wait for the Lord, then you will mount up with wings like eagles, even though you are presently ground bound. If you wait for the Lord, then you will run and not get tired, even though you feel exhausted right now. If you wait for the Lord, then you will walk and not become weary, even though you feel like you can't take another step. It's already been given, but not yet received. If you wait for the Lord, you will receive his promises, but not before the wait is over. And the problem with so many of us, right, is we want the will without the wait. We want the already, but we're not too crazy about the not yet. We want to get out of the pause without enduring the process. But Isaiah's got another direction for us. He says, you got to wait for the Lord. And if you're anything like me, right, you're like, okay, cool, I can get there. I can wait for the Lord. I don't like waiting. I'd rather not wait. I'll wait. What am I waiting for? Right? Like, what does that mean, wait for the Lord? Now, obviously, in each of our specific situations, what we're waiting for the Lord to do is going to be different. Right? But this overall broad idea of what does it mean to wait for the Lord? So this is the part of the message where I get to explain to you why we started by reading from the New American Standard Bible. Okay? That translation is widely regarded as the most literal, word-for-word translation of the Bible. But that can mean that it sometimes gets difficult to understand. All right? So those who wait for the Lord, that's literally word for word, the most accurate English words we have for what the Hebrew words meant, that's what that is. But now, if we look at the NIV of verse 31, it says this, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. So which is it, right? Are we supposed to be waiting or hoping? And the answer is yes. We're supposed to be waiting for the Lord and hoping in the Lord. The Hebrew word that Isaiah uses in verse 31 is chava, which can be described both as waiting for and hoping in something. And it's actually based on a root word that means cord. All right? And scholars say that chava, it's a hard word to say, is the feeling of tension and expectation while waiting for something to happen. So let me just give you a hypothetical, completely made up example, okay? Just imagine for a moment, if you will, that you are driving your red late 90s model Chevy pickup truck to a girl's house on Christmas evening, even though your dad told you that there's a snowstorm and you probably shouldn't be driving in these conditions. Completely made up situation, totally hypothetical. All right? And so then in this scenario, just to kind of imagine, you go and you're at the girl's house and you have dinner or whatever, it's cool. And then it's time to go home. You're like, man, I don't know what dad was worried about. And like literally right after that, you hit a patch of black ice on the dirt road that this girl lives in. And so your truck starts skidding down the hill. And you hypothetically, of course, you smash your passenger door into the biggest tree in the ditch at the bottom of the hill. And so then, of course, your theoretical response to that situation would be to call a tow truck. And then the tow truck comes and they hook the tow cable up to your truck because they're going to try and pull it out of the ditch. And then hypothetically, imagine you're standing there in the cold and the snow and you're watching as the tension in the cable gets tighter and tighter as the tow truck begins to try to pull your truck out of this ditch. And the thought crosses your mind like, man, that cable's working really hard. There's a lot of tension there. And like, you kind of have this epiphany, this realization, hypothetically, that one of two things is going to happen. Either that cable and that tow truck is going to successfully pull your truck out of the ditch that it's crashed in, or it's going to snap, it's going to swing back and shatter your windshield, and everything's going to be a whole lot worse than it was just a few minutes ago. Again, that's a completely made up situation and scenario. Broke up with that girl like 4 months later too. What a waste of a truck. Anyway. But I also think it's a perfect way to describe hope. Because there's this tension in hoping for something. Especially something without a stated deadline. Man, I say often that hope is dangerous. Because it comes with the risk of going unfulfilled. Or there's tension in hope. We're waiting for God to act in a way that he's already promised, but it has not yet arrived. And that current circumstances tell us may never arrive. And when we're hoping for something, when we're waiting for the Lord, and we're hoping in him, man, it's like we're watching our lives and there's tension there. And we're like, man, this is going to go one of two ways. Either God's going to show up and do everything he said he is, or he's not, and this thing's going to snap, and everything's going to be a whole lot worse than it was before. And that's the tension of waiting for or hoping in the Lord. That's what it means. And that's why hope is dangerous, right? And when this prophecy was first given, hope was all the Israelites had. They were living every day in the tension of already but not yet, knowing that God had the power to deliver them, but struggling to stay faithful as the wait grew ever longer. And yet Isaiah says, if you will keep waiting, keep hoping, then God will keep his promises. Let's look at some verses in Isaiah chapter 40 directly preceding verse 31. We're going to start in verse 27. It says, why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in and wait for the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. So Isaiah's prophecy shows up in this situation where the people of Israel are doing exactly what you and I would have done in those circumstances. I mean, they've been waiting for almost 70 years for God to show up. If it was me, it would take about 70 days before I start wondering where God's at. You know, they're asking questions like, man, does God even remember me? Is he paying attention to my problems? But in all of that wondering, they lost sight of the fact that their captivity in Babylon was due, at least in part, because it was at least in part a consequence of their ancestors' decision to worship idols and false gods and to turn away from the one true God. As a people, they had abandoned the ways of God, and they'd ended up somewhere that they didn't want to be, somewhere they never planned to go, and now they were accusing him of being the one who turned his back on them. You know, and again, I say this often too, man, but we like to read scripture in a revisionist mindset where we know what happens at the end. And so we like judge these people like, you dumb Israelites. how could you ever turn your back on God? But we do the same thing too. Right? Like when we make decisions or take action without seeking God's will, we create a bunch of problems for ourselves in the process. When we think that we can do it all on our own and solve our own problems and figure out our own issues, we end up somewhere we never really wanted to be. And please don't hear me say that all of the pauses and problems in life are self-inflicted. That is not the case, right? Life is hard enough without our help. But sometimes we dig the hole a little deeper and we get ourselves stuck. And so when we find ourselves in these pauses, these moments of indeterminate waiting, we start to ask questions like, where are you at, God? What are you doing? Why aren't you doing anything to help me get out of this? Why am I still waiting? We essentially start echoing the words of my 5-year-old saying, waiting is too hard. But just like my son, we're kind of right. Because waiting is too hard when all you're waiting for is an outcome or an answer. When your hope is in a result or in a circumstance, waiting is impossible. But when your hope is in the one true God, things start to change a little bit. And that's what Isaiah is saying here when he says in verse 28, do you not know? Have you not heard? Have y'all not been paying attention? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. Man, he has not forgotten you, but perhaps you have forgotten who he is. He's, again, the everlasting God. He's the creator of the universe. He has chosen to be in relationship with you through no obligation. And y'all complaining that he's not doing things according to your timeline. Isaiah says, let me remind you, he never gets weak or tired. That's y'all. We can't measure the depths of his understanding. That is who you're waiting for. That is who has promised to deliver you. That is who will give strength to the weary and increase the power of the weak. Those who wait for the Lord will find new strength. It's as if the prophet is saying to the captive and stranded people of Israel, and to those of us today who are stuck in a pause we wish we weren't in, he's saying to us all, I understand that circumstances might say otherwise, but help is on the way. If you will keep waiting, if you will keep hoping, God will keep his promises, and you'll be as free as the soaring eagle. You'll have the strength to keep going if you're willing to place your hope and trust in him, even if you can't see it today. One of my favorite things about reading the Old Testament prophets is remembering that we are not the original intended audience, right? This is not written about us, and yet it is. Okay, Isaiah is prophesying about a specific situation in Israel's history, but that prophecy can be applied directly to our lives as well. It's this really beautiful and powerful realization. And if we were reading other parts of the book of Isaiah, that would actually be really a cause for concern for some of us, because there's some stuff in there that's really convicting. But today we're reading chapter 40, verse 31, and that's the fact that we can apply it to our lives should bring us great joy. Right? And so with that in mind, I want to look a little deeper at the things that Isaiah 40:31 promises will happen if we wait for and hope in the Lord. And we'll start in the beginning. Seems like a good place. It says, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. NIV says will renew their strength. But I think that it's more accurate to say that we will gain or find new strength, because the strengthening is something that is being given to or done for us. It's not something that we're earning or doing for ourselves. Right? In fact, the Hebrew word that Isaiah uses here actually means to change or exchange. And so really Isaiah is saying, hey, God will trade your weakness for his strength. And I think it's really important for us to note that this promise is for renewed strength and not for a specific outcome. A lot of times we think that we're entitled to the results that we wanted, and if we don't get them, that means that God doesn't love us. But that's just not reality, because God never promised to give you every item on your wish list. He promised to give you the strength to make it through another day. It's a promise, right, that we will not be abandoned, that there will always be enough strength to make it through to tomorrow. It's a promise that God will meet us in our weakest moments and renew our strength. It's a promise that we will never be too lost or too tired or too broken to be found, picked up, and put back together. It's a promise that if we're willing to keep hoping and keep waiting, we will always have what we need to keep going. And the rest of the verse provides examples of ways in which our strength will be renewed. But if you pay attention, each example involves movement, which tells us that waiting for the Lord still involves action on our part. Waiting for the Lord is not the same thing, not the same kind of waiting that my wife does when she wanted to leave the house at a certain time, but she forgot to tell me what time that was, and so I'm still getting ready, and she's sitting on the couch waiting and getting frustrated because I won't hurry up, right? That's passive waiting. It might be passive aggressive waiting, but anyways, there's no action there. It's literally just sitting down and waiting for something to happen. We have to be very cautious because that's not what it means to wait for the Lord, right? I love the musical Hamilton. It's a great work of art. It's on Disney Plus if you haven't seen it. It's worth the 2 hours or however long it is. It's great. All right. And I'm really fascinated by the character of Aaron Burr. Maybe not so much the historical figure, but the character from the play. He's at first blush, he's kind of like the villain in the story, but there's a lot more complexity to him. And one of his big deals is he doesn't want to act on anything because what if that's the wrong decision? And so he kind of tries to play both sides, but he ends up not really standing up for anything or publicly stating his belief in anything. And so he misses out on a lot of opportunities and sees other people kind of passing him by because he's trying to play it safe. And about 2/3 of the way through the first act of the show, there's a song that the character of Burr sings called Wait For It. And in the song, there's a line where he says, I'm not standing still, I'm lying in wait. And if you've seen it, the actor who originated the part, Leslie Odom Jr., he sings and performs this line almost as if Aaron Burr is trying to convince himself that that's true, right? That he's like, oh, I'm not standing still. The world's not passing me by. I'm just waiting for the exact right opportunity. And as I was reading and studying Isaiah 40:31 this week, I kind of realized that some of us are too much like Aaron Burr. We've gotten so used to waiting for God to show up in our pause that we've missed multiple opportunities to escape our situation because we weren't willing to move. Some of us have gotten so comfortable with our pause that we've allowed waiting to become part of who we are. I'm just the person who's been waiting on this promise for 30 years. I'm just the person whose dreams will never get realized because I'm still waiting. We have the same fundamental problem as Aaron Burr. We've become paralyzed by the pursuit of a perfect solution to our problems. We've decided that if we start taking action on our own, hey, maybe that won't be God's plan. So I'm better off sitting right where I'm at and waiting for God to show up. We're not standing still, we tell ourselves. We're lying in wait for just the right opportunity. We forget how much easier it is to redirect an object that's already in motion than to overcome the inertia of an object that is stationary. Pastor Mark has shared many times from this stage about a mantra that his mentor taught him called pray, think, work. And the meaning behind this, as I understand it, is that in every situation, every difficulty, or even just regular everyday stuff, you start out by praying and asking God for wisdom and direction and guidance and clarity and discernment and strength. And then after you've prayed, you begin to think about your situation and begin to think about what is the best thing for me to do today. Sometimes the answer really is nothing. But sometimes there's things that we need to do to step out and get ourselves in a better situation or a better position. And then work means that we just go out and do those things while simultaneously waiting for the Lord to show up and handle the parts of the situation that we know that we can't. Or to turn us around if we're moving in the wrong direction. And I think that this mindset of pray, think, work if we applied it to some of our waiting situations, we'd realize we didn't really have to wait as long as we have been. Thing is, if we're not trying to move forward while we wait, then why would we need our strength to be renewed? Isaiah 40 is all about the need for the nation of Israel to start moving toward their future, right? It's like, hey, the wait is over, so keep waiting. But now your waiting is a different kind of waiting. It's a waiting of preparation, of getting ready to move forward. Israel would have inherently understood that it was time for them to get up from the muck and the mud of self-pity and despair and to start dreaming of, planning for, and moving towards something better. They would have understood that deliverance from Babylon would require action on their part. Even with God's help and intervention, they would still have to return to their land, rebuild their towns and their temple, and repair what had been broken so that God could restore and renew their nation. They had to be willing to move forward. And I don't know your situation, and I do know that moving forward looks different in every situation and circumstance. But we have to understand that waiting for and hoping in the Lord does not mean sitting in the same miserable place we've been since the beginning of our pause and feeling sorry for ourselves. We've got to be willing to move forward in our faith, move forward in our trust, move forward in our relationship with God. We've got to move forward into the tension and risk that comes with hope. We have to be willing to step into the middle of our not yet situation because we are daring to believe in the already of God's promises. If we're not willing to take action and do our part, then all of our waiting and hoping will be futile. And so with the idea of movement in mind, I want to look specifically at the three examples or metaphors that Isaiah gives in verse 31 to see how each of these might apply to us where we are today. And the first example says that those who wait for the Lord will mount up with wings like eagles or soar on wings like eagles. And probably the most common understanding of this metaphor among theologians is just that hope, much like Red Bull, gives you wings. Right? It's just this idea that, when we're willing to wait for the Lord and put our trust in Him and hope in the things that He has promised, right? Then like an eagle rises on the currents of the wind, so too will we rise on the currents of God's grace and provision to greater heights than we have ever seen before. And that's true, right? All of that is true. But I came across another understanding of this verse that's kind of a little bit weirder, but I want to share it with you. Because I came across this idea that ancient Jews had that eagles would actually molt or shed all of their feathers at once every 10 years. And it would go like this, right? They would say that, for 10 straight years, the eagles would just start flying higher and higher and higher, getting closer and closer to the heat of the sun. And then in that 10th year, the heat would become too much, and they would plunge down into the depths of the sea, and they would molt all of their feathers at once, and they would emerge from the waters, beginning to grow new feathers and starting to ascend to the heavens again. When I read this ancient belief, I thought of two thoughts came to my mind. First is, hey, that explains the idea of bald eagle. And the second, much more serious one, was Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 5:17. Where he writes, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, a new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. And so if waiting for the Lord means putting our hope and our trust in Him, then we are definitely in Christ, as Paul means it when we wait on Him. And that means that if we're waiting and hoping in the Lord, then we are a new creation. That it means that who we used to be is not who we are anymore. Unless or until it is again. And here's what I mean by that. See, we're all really good at surrendering control to God when we feel like we've reached our limit. When we've flown too close to the sun and we're running out of options and we need our strength renewed. In those moments, it's really easy for us to dive into His promises and provision like an eagle plunging into the sea and to emerge renewed and restored, ready to trust Him always. But the higher we fly, the harder it gets to remember how far we had fallen. And too often we start to shift our hope and trust away from Jesus and towards some other outcome or desire, or maybe even our own strength or abilities. And we start to convince ourselves that, hey, yeah, we can do this on our own. until trouble comes our way again and we're reminded of how much we need him. And all over again, we surrender control and plunge into the sea of his grace, waiting and hoping in his promises. And that's not the way it always goes, but many of us find ourselves caught in this cycle of redemption and rebellion. Redemption and rebellion. We dive into his grace for redemption and forgiveness, and we fly to new heights, and we forget all he's done for us, and we rebel by doing things our own way. And then stuff hits the fan, and we're like, oh, I need some redemption. And we dive back into the waters, and we live in this cycle. And the beauty of God's grace and his love and his mercy is that with every plunge, he takes us back again, allowing us to dive deeper and trust him more than we ever have before. God will never say, hey man, that's enough. You done flip-flop too many times. You ain't coming back into the grace of the sea of my grace any longer. God is always ready and willing to accept us with open arms. And so if you're someone who's caught in that cycle of redemption and rebellion, that's okay because God's grace is sufficient for you. But what I want us to understand is that's not the ultimate destination for us as Christ followers. Because when I read this verse last week, I didn't think of renewal or redemption or restoration. I thought of freedom, right? When I think of waiting for and hoping in the Lord, as Isaiah means it, I think of an eagle flying high and free, unburdened and unbothered, far above the fears that weigh so many other creatures down. And this kind of flight is not something that an eagle does only for a little while before its wings start to falter and need repair. It is actually a fundamental part of what makes an eagle an eagle. And so waiting for and hoping in Jesus is supposed to be a permanent part of how we live and who we are so that we too can be unburdened and unbothered by the things that used to weigh us down. And listen, I'm not trying to say that if we consistently and constantly hope in and wait for the Lord that we will never experience pain or grief or doubt or suffering, because we will. Man, all of those things are part of being human. Sometimes we may even need to fly a little lower or stop flying at all for a time, but to be free in the hope of Jesus is to know that when the time for waiting or mourning or questioning is over, we will fly again, because the strength in our wings comes from the one who made the wind. And with our hope placed in him, there is nothing we cannot rise above. And so Isaiah moves from flying to running, saying that those who wait for and hope in the Lord will run and not grow weary. I didn't like this one as much because I don't know about you, but I don't like running. I really try not to do it unless somebody's chasing me. And I kind of always felt that way. Like, unless I'm on a basketball court, I don't want to run. And then now as I've gotten older, that makes being on a basketball court a lot harder because my lungs start burning after about 30 seconds. But thinking about this idea of running without getting weary, I remembered when I was about 16 years old. This one's not hypothetical, this is real. When I was 16 years old, I wanted to be an assistant basketball coach at this small Christian school in our town. And so I asked the athletic director, and he's like, yeah, you can help me on one condition. Because it turns out that the athletic director was also the science teacher and the head coach of every sport that the school had. And so he's like, listen, you can help me coach basketball, but you're also going to coach soccer and girls volleyball and track and field. I'm like, cool, whatever. And so this guy was a Division II All-American in cross country, which, if you're not familiar, is a sport that we could rename running around outside for a very long time and no real reason, and nothing about that sport would change. So this guy's all about endurance. And so he thinks it's going to be funny, right, to put my out-of-shape self on the blocks with these 4th through 8th graders and make me run all the races with them. 100 meter, 200 meter, 400 meter, because it's motivation for the actual athletes, because they're going to try to say they beat an 11th grader. And for me, it's like, I either got to win or go home embarrassed because I lost to a 4th grader. And this guy would talk trash to me, but he was Canadian. And so his trash talk was super nice. And so I'd barely win a race against this 4th grader, and I'd be like, and he'd just come up and he'd be like, oh, Coach Ian, sorry I had to work so hard to beat a 4th grader in a race, eh? Looks like you're out of breath. You know, maybe you should ask your mom about getting you some more Gatorade for next practice, eh? I mean, I don't know if that's a direct quote, but that's the kind of stuff like, but you knew, because he would say it with like this smile, like, it's like, I'm talking trash to you right now. It's like, would y'all Southerners bless people's hearts, man? That's this Canadian dude. You know, shout out to Mr. Summerhays. That dude changed my life in a lot of cool ways. But anyway, my point of that story is, how great would it be to run and not grow weary? Right? Like to just not have to worry about it. To be able to run faster and further than anybody else and never break a sweat. But that's not how running works. You know, it's not how life works either. Because the burn that comes with running is what makes running so valuable. And with life, you know, it's hard. The terrain can get rocky and there's bumps in the road. Sometimes we can't even see more than a few feet in front of us, and we've got to decide if we're going to keep running. And so when I read Isaiah say that if you wait for the Lord and hope in the Lord, then you will run and not grow weary, I'm reminded of Paul's words in Romans 5, verses 3 through 5, which says in the New Living Translation, we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how dearly God loves us because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with his love. And so Isaiah says, you know, that hope leads to endurance, and Paul says that endurance leads to hope. And once again, the answer is yes. They're both right. Because I'm not sure you can have one without the other. See, in life, if we don't have something to hope for, then we're eventually going to stop running. We'll just throw in a towel and give up. The longer we run, the more hopeful we get that we're arriving soon at the destination. And if it turns out that the finish line is not over that next hill either, then it will be hope that keeps us running even further. Sometimes hope is all we've got, and so it's the only thing that we run for. But hope is risky because it always comes with a what if. Right? Waiting for God is risky because what if he doesn't show up this time? Hoping in the Lord is risky because what if he doesn't answer my prayers? And when we choose to keep running while we're waiting, we're risking the fact that it all may have been for nothing. But the thing about risk is it comes with reward. So when God does show up and when he does answer my prayers, even if it's not in the way that I hoped or expected, then I'll be able to run a little faster and a little further the next time I'm faced with a pause that I'd rather not be in, because practice brings progress and progress brings passion. Hope brings endurance and endurance brings hope, and hope will not lead to disappointment. And then Isaiah closes verse 31 by saying that those who wait for and hope in the Lord will walk and not be faint. And again, man, I read that. I was like, I can do that already. I can even walk and chew gum at the same time. I only tripped over my own feet once last week. It was actually 4, but don't tell anybody. Yeah, but we got to stay with the metaphor if we want to get the application to this. All right, because walking certainly seems less significant than flying or running, but it's still a form of action. It's still a way of moving forward. And so if you're here today, man, and you are watching the people in your life fly by you or zoom past you, and you feel like, man, I'm moving so slow. There must be something wrong with me. Maybe my situation is worse. Maybe I'm more tired. Maybe my faith isn't as strong. But there's got to be something wrong with me because this person's flying by and this person's running 17 miles an hour. And all I can barely put one foot in front of the other. But if you're here today and you're trying to wait on the Lord, you're trying to keep hoping in him, but you've been waiting for a long time and you're tired and you're hurting and you're not even sure how much longer you can keep walking, but you're trying. If that's you this morning, I just want to say, keep going. Keep going because the wait will be worth it. Keep going because hope is still hope no matter how dim it feels in the moment. Keep going because while your pace may be slower than others, you're still making progress. Keep going because even if you only move forward 15 feet a day, you'll still be a mile ahead of where you were this time last year. Keep going because what one person takes for granted can be a miracle for someone else. 8 years ago when my daughter was 6 months old, I remember sitting in a doctor's office in Chapel Hill. And there was a geneticist and some other doctors, and they were just giving us the long list of things that our daughter might not do. And one of those was walk. So like a year and a half later, when my baby girl had this big metal contraption of a walker that she was using to help her get around the places that she was going, man, all these other people would kind of like gawk and stare and ask questions like, what is going on with your kid? But my wife, Tiana, and I, man, we were celebrating. Because the people asking questions didn't know how far we'd come. They didn't know our story. They weren't in that doctor's office with us. And so for what was a cause for question and concern for someone else was a cause for celebration for our family. And then a year later when that little girl stood up on her own two legs and took these two wobbly steps, 2 years developmentally after she should have, man, we were crying tears of joy because we knew how far she'd come. So what I want to say to you today is keep going, because what one person takes for granted, someone else can see as a miracle. And if you're here today, you are a miracle because you haven't given up yet. Whether you're flying or running or walking or even crawling inch by inch, keep going. Keep hoping, keep waiting, because God is going to give you the strength you need to make it through the next day and the next day and the next day. And it's okay to simultaneously thank God for the already while being desperate for strength to survive the not yet. I came here today to tell you that there is purpose in your pause. You just have to be willing to wait for it.